You knew it before you had words for it. Somewhere in childhood, maybe 8, maybe 12, you noticed that the family was reading you differently than it was reading your siblings. Your reactions were called dramatic. Your questions were called difficult. Your feelings were called too much. The other kids seemed to fit the family in a way you didn't, and by the time you were a teenager, the label had become official. You were the different one, the complicated one, the black sheep, and you've spent the years since trying to figure out whether the label was accurate or whether something else was happening that nobody in the family had language for. If you're a person who ended up cast as the black sheep of your family, the one whose difference the family kept naming, the one who couldn't quite fit no matter how hard you tried, the psychology underneath isn't what the family narrative usually says. It isn't that you were born difficult. It's a specific documented dynamic in family systems, and once you see the mechanism, both the label and the years you spent believing it start to look different. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Every family is a small system that quietly assigns roles to the people inside it. There's usually a responsible one, a funny one, a successful one, a peacemaker. The roles aren't chosen consciously. They emerge from the specific mix of temperaments in the family, the anxieties the family is carrying, and the parts of itself the family cannot look at directly. And in most families, one role that gets assigned is the different one. The child whose way of being doesn't fit the family's official self-image. The child who ends up in that role usually shares one specific quality. They notice or feel things the rest of the family has agreed not to notice or feel. The parents' unhappiness, the siblings' cruelty, the unspoken tension nobody names at dinner, the gap between how the family presents itself and how it actually functions. The other children learn to work around these things, or genuinely don't see them. The black sheep sees them and reacts to them, and the reaction is what gets labelled as difficulty. The seeing was never the problem. The reacting was inconvenient. Psychiatrist Murray Bowen, whose family systems theory has been foundational since the 1960s, documented a specific mechanism he called the family projection process. In any family carrying unresolved anxiety, which is essentially every family, that anxiety gets projected disproportionately onto one child, not because that child is worse or more fragile, but because that child's temperament makes them the most receptive antenna for what the family is not consciously processing. Bowen's work showed that this child often becomes the family's symptom bearer, carrying the difficulty the family system couldn't hold. Family therapist Salvador Minuchin extended this in his structural family therapy work, describing the identified patient, the family member whose visible difficulty makes the system's larger dysfunction possible to see. And psychoanalyst Alice Miller documented how families with a strong need to see themselves as functional often scapegoat the child whose honest perception threatens that self-image. The black sheep isn't the family's failure. The black sheep is often the family's most reliable witness. Picture this: a family gathering. Everyone is playing their assigned roles. Your parents are performing the version of themselves they perform at family gatherings. Your siblings are participating in the family's shared story. And you, sitting at the table, notice what everyone else has decided not to notice. The parents drinking, the siblings' coldness, the specific way nobody is acknowledging the thing that happened last month. Nobody says anything about it. You don't say anything either, but your face does. Or you ask a question that's slightly off script, or you fail to laugh at the joke everyone else laughed at. And instantly the family reads you as the difficult one again. Not because you were provocative, not because you were being dramatic, because you were doing the exact thing that made you the black sheep in the first place. Refusing to fully participate in the shared agreement that the surface of the family is the truth about the family. From inside, You were doing what your nervous system has always done, seeing what's there and being unable to pretend you didn't see it. But here's where it gets interesting. Black sheep, as adults, often carry a specific psychological profile: unusually accurate perception of interpersonal dynamics, low tolerance for pretending, a strong internal compass that resists social pressure, and a specific kind of loneliness that comes from years of being right about things nobody in the family would confirm. These aren't defects. In any environment other than the family that shaped them, this profile is often what people call insight, integrity, or emotional intelligence. But there's more going on than perception. The black sheep role also produces a specific kind of resilience the other children don't develop. Because the black sheep was never fully absorbed into the family's shared story, they had to build their own values, their own frame of reference, their own sense of what's true. By adulthood, the black sheep often has something the siblings don't, a self that was constructed rather than inherited, and that construction is unusually durable under pressure. And here's the kicker. The cultural framing of the family black sheep has been almost entirely as the child who went wrong. That framing gets the causality backward. In many families, the black sheep is the child who refused to go wrong in the specific way the family was quietly asking everyone to go wrong. The label was the family's way of managing the discomfort the black sheep's honesty produced. Now, let's be honest. Two things at once. First, not every black sheep is a truth teller. Some family members really are difficult in ways that have nothing to do with family projection. Genuinely destructive behavior, real cruelty or personality patterns that would be difficult in any environment. If your role in the family involved actual harm you caused, this reframe doesn't erase that. Second, the reverse also matters. Some families really are dangerous, and the child who became the black sheep is right to have distanced themselves. This video applies to the specific pattern where a family with real, ordinary dysfunction scapegoated one child for being the family's honest witness. You probably know which one applies to you, but for the person watching this and recognizing yourself in the pattern, the one who spent years believing the family was right about you being the difficult one, here's what's happening. You weren't broken, you weren't defective, you weren't the family's problem. You were often the family's most accurate witness, and the label was the family's way of holding the discomfort you're seeing produced. What looked like your dysfunction was often your refusal to participate in the shared denial that lets a family look functional from outside. The work isn't to prove the family wrong or force them to admit anything. The work is to stop internalizing a label that was never really about who you were, and to notice that the traits the family called difficulty are usually the same traits the rest of the world calls perception, integrity, and depth. There's something quietly tragic about a family's black sheep. They spent years being told they were the problem, when they were often the only person in the room refusing to pretend there wasn't a problem. They carried the family's discomfort so the rest of the family didn't have to look at it, and they usually did it alone. If you've spent your life quietly believing the family's story about who you are, this might be the moment to consider that the story was doing a job for the family, not describing you. The label was a container. What it held wasn't your dysfunction, it was the family's, and you were the one strong enough to carry it while everyone else looked away. You weren't the family's problem. You were often the family's most accurate witness, and the label they gave you was a container for the discomfort your honesty produced, not a description of who you actually are. If you're the person I've been describing for the last 8 minutes, the one who has spent decades wondering whether the family was right about you, I want you to hear this. The label was never really about you. It was about what the family needed one person to carry so the rest could look away. You weren't the difficult one. You were the one who wouldn't pretend. If any part of this landed for you, I'd love to know. Tell me in the comments about the moment you first realized the label might not have been the whole truth. If you want more videos that name what's actually happening in the patterns most people never have the language for, that's what this channel is for. Hit subscribe. See you in the next.